we'd have something to refer to, you know, prior to just instantaneously thinking of things.
Well, it's less about just answering questions and more about simply having a conversation. So don't think of it as an interview for a newspaper or a TV show, but just having a conversation with me and also with your daughter.
Like
here.
we're having coffee together.
Yeah. And we also have some books here. You know, we can go through a few photos and say, I remember Joe and I remember Mike and that sort of thing. But to begin with, the first step is we have to say that my name is Stanton Paddock, and today is the 3rd of August, 2007. We're at the 2007 Denver 10th Mountain Reunion, and we are speaking with, give your name, spell it, and where you live, and what unit you're in.
I'm Wallace Barkeen, born and raised in Denver.
And you still live in Denver?
Yes.
And which unit did you belong to in the 10th Mountain?
C-85.
And what were your service dates? When did you go in? When did you go out?
I'm sorry, I didn't.
Your service dates. When did you join the Army?
Oh.
And what year did you leave the Army?
Oh. I received my ROTC commission at Oklahoma State University on the 16th of May, 1940. And I received orders to go on active duty the 10th of July. And I stayed in the Army, retired in August 31, 1960.
Oh, so that was your career?
Yes.
And what was your ending rank?
Lieutenant Colonel.
All right. So when you joined the ROTC,
yes,
you didn't know that you were going to be going to the 10th Mountain Division. Is that
oh,
right?
no.
And what it was your choice to join the 10th, am I right?
I didn't hear your question.
So when was the first time that you heard about the 10th Mountain Division and you decided that this was the unit for me?
I had an assignment at Fort Lewis, Washington. And as I drove through the headquarters buildings, I noticed a sign on one of the buildings. This is the 87th Mountain Infantry Headquarters. I said, Mountain Infantry? That's for me. So I went into the headquarters building and talked to the adjutant of the 87th. I told him of my experiences in Colorado as a young man, and I did a lot of hiking and fishing. And our conversation got around to why are you inquiring about the 87th Mountain Infantry? And I told him I would like to become a member of it. So after further conversations and qualifying myself to be a member of the 87th, he asked me, well, can you ski? I mentioned that I could ski well enough to keep my both on the same side of the tree. He said, if you're that good, you can qualify for the 87th. So I made an application to become a member of the 87th Mountain Infantry. And within a couple weeks, I had my orders to report to Camp Hale, Colorado. That was on New Year's Day that my wife and I and our 5-month-old daughter left for Camp Hale. And I arrived at Camp Hale on the 4th of January, 43. And I stayed at Camp Hale until June of 44, and then left to go to Italy.
Right. And so what were your duties during your time at Camp Hale?
Primarily company commander, but then towards my later days at Camp Hale, I was S3 of the 85th and wrote training programs for our men and officers.
So you designed the maneuvers or the training that they go out and do?
Some of them, yes.
Mm-hmm. Any in particular that you remember that are memorable?
Well, I remember making a reconnaissance and looking over a certain area. I thought that this would be a good area for a 3-day program. So, writing up the necessary procedures, some of our regimental personnel went on this nice 3-day program. And after the 3 days, back in the wilderness, we told our sergeants and our lieutenants, you have your compass, and you know your orientation. Now find your way back to camp. And we left them.
And did they do it?
And they came back.
And were they angry at you for giving them such a rough time, or did they love it?
No, they were appreciative of the ability to get back into the confines of our camp. So it was a good program. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So tell me, what was your impression of the mountains? You know, you grew up in Denver, so you knew them and perhaps loved them. Some people came from Kansas and loved/hated them. What was your feeling that first time you came into Camp Hale and saw this beautiful place?
Well, I was very well impressed, and I thought this would be a good place for a home. Mm-hmm. And I found it very, very acceptable.
And what about your wife and your daughter? Perhaps doesn't remember it, but what did she feel? You know, having to live in that small town of Leadville.
Well, she lived in Buena Vista. we were fortunate that the chaplain at the Buena Vista Correction Center had been a classmate of mine at North High, and he was the chaplain at the institution, and he and his wife made our family welcome to Buena Vista. And we rented a motel, and I was able to visit my wife and daughter over the weekends. So it worked out pretty well.
Absolutely. And so I asked about your duties at Camp Hale.
Yes.
You said, doing some training programs.
Yeah.
Of course, once you ship off overseas to Italy, not so much training anymore. What were your overseas duties?
There were 5 officers had been issued orders to report to Italy. This was the first week of June of '44. When we got to Italy, we found out that we were no longer with the 10th Mountain Division, that we were to receive other assignments. I was very fortunate to be interviewed by a lieutenant colonel who was to get officers for the headquarters 6th Army Group, which had jurisdiction over the 7th U.S. Army and the French Army. And these two armies were to make the invasion in southern France and go up the Rhone Valley, clear the Germans out of France, and stay with the military until Germany capitulated. So I was sorry that I had to leave the 10th Mountain Division, but this other assignment with the 6th Headquarters 6th Army Group was very interesting. I was assigned to the War Room operation, and we had 2 guards posted outside our war room door. No one got into the war room except we that were working there and the generals of the headquarters. And as the military forces moved forward, we followed, and we ended up at Heidelberg University, occupying some of their buildings. And it was there when I was on night duty in the war room, I received a phone call. The caller identified himself, and I had to identify myself. He told me that tomorrow at a certain time, the high command, the German high command, was going to surrender. I had finished posting the necessary information on our operational maps. And I was writing a letter to my wife, Lucille. And in that letter, I said, special attention, and quoted that the Germans were going to be, German High Command was going to surrender the next day.
So what are your feelings being one of the first people to know that this awful war was about to end? Did you run around telling everybody so excited, or you had to keep it mum?
Well, we notified the generals of the headquarters, and that was quite a experience. Yeah. And after Germany capitulated, there was no further need for war room operation. And I received an assignment to go to Shrivenham, England. And there I was to become a battalion commander of the student battalion for the American University at Shrivenham. We had 3 battalions of students. They had applied for attendance at the school, at the university, and they could get, in 2 months, they could get 2 or 3 college credits. And I had that assignment from the 1st of June until the June of 45. And I stayed there until November, and then returned to the States.
All right. Well, I'd like to take you back to Camp Hale now, back to the States, so stepping back a few months, a few years. And I'd like, what was the most fun thing about being in this elite group in this special place? What just stands out in your mind? And when you remember Camp Hale, what just jumps out at you, the first thing?
Well, having had a lot of hiking experiences as a young man, working for the Forest Service and all, I thoroughly enjoyed the hikes and the problems that we had at Camp Hale with the 10th.
You say the problems that you had, so challenges to be overcome?
Yes. We had, of course, the low temperatures. 30, 35 degrees below zero. And with the best cold weather equipment at that time, we found it very comfortable. We could live comfortably in the lower temperatures. And we became very well associated, or let's say, we had a real good feeling among each other that we were a part of of something that maybe after the war people will be able to learn from our experiences.
And other veterans that I've talked to sometimes felt that because it was 3 years of training and then just a couple months, overseas. While you were at Camp Hale, was there that feeling of, are we going to stay stateside this entire war? Or what did you think about the other units that were shipping out all the time while you guys stayed stateside?
Well, I don't think that we could visualize what we were going to encounter after we got into a combat area. And our thoughts mostly were to become experts in winter warfare, and then when the opportunity came, we'd be able to apply what we had learned.
Mm-hmm. And I'm curious about relationships between officers, such as yourself, and the enlisted men. I've heard that that in the 10th Mountain, they were different than in the rest of the Army.
Yes. We just seemed to blend together, and we had a real good association between enlisted men and officers, because we were sharing the same thing, learning new things, new methods, and we didn't seem to have that class distinction. It was a good, very good feeling that we had among each other.
And I'm curious about, while you were at Camp Hale, life outside of the Army. You said your child and your wife lived in Buena Vista in a hotel. Was there a culture of other officers or officers' wives that hung out together? So, what did you do on the weekends? What life outside of Camp Hale, but still in the mountains? Did you go skiing? Did you go hiking? Anything like that?
Our weekends were spent not so much with other members of the 10th, but with the local people and the church in Buena Vista. And as I mentioned, this friend of ours was also a minister, and he was the minister for the church at Buena Vista. So we had a lot of association with the civilian there in Buena Vista. There was one time I remember on our way coming, we had left Camp Hale, and prior to arriving at Buena Vista, we saw a deer across the river, and it was authorized to, at that time, deer season was open, and one of the officers with us had his his rifle. So he shot this deer, and we had to walk across, and the deer fell. We walked across the Arkansas River in our shoes, in our boots, and we dragged that deer across the river and put it up on top of his car, which had a ski rack, tied the deer on there. That was one of the interesting events of that weekend. And he had the deer slaughtered, and he lived in Salida, which is about 20, 30 miles south of Buena Vista. So that was an interesting weekend. And when we were in Buena Vista, and I remember we spent one weekend at the ice plant. And at this ice plant, they harvested the ice, put it in their storage house, and then they furnished the ice for the re-icing of the refrigerated freight cars. So it was an interesting operation. But all in all, I had a very enjoyable time at Camp Hale, and my wife and our daughter enjoyed the association at Buena Vista. So we're very thankful that we had that opportunity.
So because you were involved in the training and logistics, and everything at that time was new and experimental, I'm curious if there were any training techniques or perhaps gear that you tried out that didn't work. Can you describe something that the 10th Mountain experimented with and they decided not to go with that because it didn't work?
I can't recall any activities that didn't work, because we did our best to anticipate what we were going to do and what the answers were for that problem. Yeah.
And so now I'd like to know, you spent 20 or more years in the Army.
Yeah.
And Camp Hale was at the very beginning of that. How did you see the Army, and how did your training at Camp Hale, how did you perhaps take some of what you learned there and spread it to the larger Army in general in the rest of your career?
Training at Camp Hale brought out a lot of your abilities to perform, and this is that followed my career, and even into civilian life. Yeah. The training was very interesting, and new ideas and seemed to come up all the time. So it wasn't a go by the book so much. We had to make our own programs. We couldn't follow the flatland programs and information that we received from them. So Camp Hale training was a great advantage to all of us. Yeah.
Now I'd like to know if do you have any questions that simply because you know his story better than me hearing it for the first time that you like to ask?
No, I don't have any.
Okay.
Thank you.
And is there anything in your scrapbooks that you'd like to flip through or show us or talk about? Any old friends or anything in there?
Well, I haven't looked at these, but I made up, we have 4 children, and we made up these books for our 4 children. And we always attend the memorial service at Tennessee Pass. And then we our Rocky Mountain chapter always has a Christmas party between Christmas and New Year's. And that's held up at one of the restaurants up on Genesee. The restaurant capacity is 150. So we always have at least 150 for our Christmas dinner up there, which is a nice thing. Then another thing that Hugh Evans promotes, and we have a highway cleanup, and we usually cover up some of the highway up on the road on the highway going up through Idaho Springs and on up across the divide. But that cleaning up the debris along the highway is a good project that Hugh Evans always is initiating. We do that once a year. But these are just pictures that we have. the Continental Divide there, Tennessee Pass, pictures on Camp Hale and some of the mountains around there. When I arrived at Camp Hale, they were still pounding nails and putting up drywall. These
Are these photographs you took?
pardon me?
Are these your photographs? You took them?
Yes. And another interesting thing was MGM came up to Camp Hale, and they were there almost a week or 10 days, and they made the documentary film on the 10th Mountain Division. And this is some pictures of their staff. So that was an interesting thing.
Did you end up watching the movie that they made?
Oh, yes.
And what did you think of it?
It was very good. It's the first one that they came out. I've forgotten the name of it now. These were some of the pictures that were. I donated all my negatives to the Resource Center. Here's one on when we were on a 5-day maneuver. This is Wally receiving a letter from his sweetheart. So these are nice.
So who were your friends? You said Wally. Who were some of the soldiers that you were, and other officers that you were close to?
Well, Dick Over is one of my better friends. I didn't know Hugh Evans at that time. There was Sheeler, Major Sheeler was the battalion commander of the 1st Battalion, the 85th. And later, after the war, Sheeler was the commanding officer at Cold Weather Winter Command at Colorado Springs. And I had orders to go to Camp Hale in the spring of '52. And when I arrived at Camp Hale, at Fort Carson, Sheeler assigned me as adjutant of the Cold Weather Training Command. And I had that assignment until I left to go to Japan. Colonel Sheeler was a fine gentleman. He's died a couple years ago. And my wife and I have put together 2 volumes of our life. Much of it is pertaining to our military career.
All right, well, our time is almost up, but my one last question is, did I miss anything? Is there any question I forgot to ask? Is there anything that you would like to talk about that, I didn't even think to ask? This is your opportunity.
I've been very fortunate. My wife and I have been very fortunate to we've been married for over 66 years. We have 4 children, 3 daughters and a son. And our family is a close-knit, very close. We all love each other. We all help each other. We thank God every day for our association. And I wish that all families were as close to each other as is ours. And as I say, every day, I, my wife, and our children, they also ask the good Lord that we can continue to live a few more years together before the CO and I pass on. But ours has been a wonderful life. And I thank the Lord for the way He's guided us from place to place, and all. I can look back across our life and just see how God's finger is just, you go here now, you go there now. It's been a great, great life. And we thank the Lord.
And I'd like to thank you, sir, for coming in and taking the time to put down your memories for the Resource Center. I know you didn't want to, but you did a good job.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely. So let me just, before you stand up, let me pull the microphone off you so you don't grip on it. And actually, can I see your name tag for 1 second so I can show it to the camera?
What?
Your name tag.
Is your name tag in your pocket?
Yeah.
He wants to put it on the camera. I think it's in your pocket. I'm so glad you did this, Dad.
Oh,
Here, I'll take it. I better let him do that. You want me to hold that for you, or would that help?
Sure, just hold it so that, yeah, right about there, just so the light hits it. And let me zoom in so we can make sure we get the right spelling, etc. All right.